Uh, my name is Man, and I'm from letsrecoveronline. And today we have a very special guest, and he's called Simon. And today's topic is chosen by Simon, and it's a very interesting topic, and it's about loneliness in sobriety. So over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Man. I've known Man for a while. I used to be a serious user of drink and drugs and came into recovery about 5 years ago, and I recently celebrated 4 years of sobriety. And I wanted to talk a little bit about loneliness. Thanks to Man for asking me, because I do live alone, and I was living alone when I came into recovery. But first of all, I want to make this point that being alone, being lonely, has nothing to do with whether or not there are people around you. It's a state of mind. So, when I was a vigorous, active drinker and addict, I often was around people. I knew a lot of people, but I became more and more isolated in my own mind. And I think that needs to be understood. And secondly, you can be alone, but not be isolated. So if you're healthy in your mind and your habits, then you can spend time on your own and not feel lonely or isolated. So the fact that we get to a point where we feel desperate and alone is to do with our addictions and our failure really to address them. And what happened to me, and I'm a very gregarious person, and one of the things that's happened since I started to recover is that I'm once again meeting people. I've got a diners club going on where I invite a few people that I like to dinner a couple of times a month, things that I never did when I was an active addict. Because one of the things that addiction does, and I've heard this a few times from addicts, it's quite clever. Your addiction wants to get you alone in order to kill you, but it doesn't want to kill you straight away. It wants to get you alone and then torment you for a while before it kills you. And the voice in your head, as you get more and more into your active addiction, will say, wouldn't it be a good idea if I went off and had a drink or bought some gear or locked myself up on my own? That would really take care of the discomfort that I'm feeling at the moment. And of course, that's a huge lie. It won't. It'll give you a momentary joy, perhaps, but very quickly you'll be even more isolated and dismayed and confused and unhappy than you were before. So one of the first things to observe is that by seeking the company of other people who are the same as you, but in recovery, that is other addicts who understand what it's like to be lonely and isolated, they understand it completely because they've been there, is an enormous relief, because you don't have to pretend. They know exactly what you mean and what you're going through. And one of the things at the very beginning, if any of you who are listening to this are struggling with addictions and deciding whether or not to come into recovery, I know a lot of you will be spending money on conventional therapists and doctors, and they might be well-meaning people. They probably are. For decades, I spent money on all kinds of therapy. I only really started to get better when I started to work with other addicts and alcoholics who understood what it was like, recovering ones, that is, and recovered ones. Why is that? Well, because nobody who isn't like us can really understand us. However sympathetic they are, we seem crazy. We deliberately take a wonderful life and we wreck it. We do things that alienate us from people that love us, like our partners and our children and our parents. And we do it not just once, but repeatedly. And despite having every opportunity to change, ordinary people, however much they love us, don't understand that. It seems either mysterious, or for many of them, it seems willful. They become impatient. They say, you're doing this deliberately, and I had that so much. All of you, if you're listening to this, will have had somebody say to you, in effect, pull yourself together. You know what? That's the worst advice you can give anyone that's an addict, because it's an illness. So just to go back to the beginning, when I became, one of the signs that I was becoming a more active addict and alcoholic was, I remember at university, and this is a long time ago because I'm 64 years old now, and I've only been sober for 4.5 years,
Mhm.
was my mates would say, let's do something. And we would get ready to go out, and then we'd have a bit of a drink, and then we'd maybe smoke something or use something. And at that point, I didn't really want to go out. They wanted to go out, and I wanted to just sit around and continue to put things in my body, probably until I completely lost control, had a blackout or whatever. That's the difference between ordinary people that can have a bit of fun and stop, and those of us that just once started can never step back, you know. I heard it said by an alcoholic, you know, one drink is too many and 1,000 are never enough. You know, we can't put anything in our body or we completely lose control. So you know, that process began with me quite early on, and I got lonelier and lonelier and lonelier as I got older and older and older. And I wasn't lonely in the sense that I wasn't around people. On the contrary, I was really busy. I had my own company. I was flying hither and thither, but late at night and in my own room, you know, I was a fearful, often crying ruin, not knowing what to do with myself. And it wasn't until I sat down with somebody else who'd was recovering from the same thing as me, and listened to what he or she had to say, that I realized that I wasn't alone, I wasn't unique, and that there was a solution. And the solution does not lie in being alone and trying to beat it with your intellect. I see this over and over again in people that are just coming into recovery because they recognize that they have an issue. They'll say, well, you know, I've got it figured out, or I can control it, or, you know, all of those good things. Doesn't matter how. It's not an intellectual challenge, you know, this. It's recognizing that you have a disease that wants to isolate you, that you're powerless over your disease, and that you need to get into the company of other recovering addicts and alcoholics if you're to have any chance of shedding that loneliness and discovering that there are people that you can be completely honest with. And, you know, that's what happened to me. You know, I don't want to go on about myself too much because it's tedious, but in the last 6 months, I celebrated 4 years sobriety, was diagnosed with a serious form of cancer, had a 7-hour surgery, and from which I'm now recovering, and published a book, all in the course of 4 months. None of that could have happened if I was still drinking and using. And the reason it happened is because I came into recovery with other alcoholics and addicts, and I learned to come to terms with the fact that I have no control over my addiction, to deal with the things in the past that were dragging me back, and to look forward in a positive way. And I start every day with a prayer of gratitude because I am grateful. I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful to have Man as a friend, and I'm grateful to be here on this wonderful sunny Easter Friday in Singapore.
Thank you, Simon. So I have a few thoughts and questions. I think what's interesting about loneliness, about being alone, is this idea of disconnection. You know, I think when we're very connected to the rest of the world and to people and to love and to, you know, it's a very it's the opposite feeling, you know, of feeling like nobody understands me. You know, I can't connect with people no matter how much I try. And I don't know if you drank partly because you wanted to fit in. You know, I drank very much so. Like I want, and when I'm sober, my mind starts to say stuff, and when I'm around people, it tends to go on a negative slant, right? It tends to go into like, that's stupid. What are you talking about? This is ridiculous. Like you know, a lot of judgments come in, and it's very difficult. It's very unbearable, you know. Whereas when I was drinking, a few drinks later, I could tolerate anybody. You know, like my tolerance is very low. When I had a few drinks and drugs or whatever, my tolerance goes up. I don't really care, you know. So what do you think causes this disconnection? I think that's, or why do we like that disconnection almost?
Well, there are a lot of theories about this. I mean, first of all, I don't think it always means that people are suffering from trauma, although sometimes it does. I mean, in my case, you know, childhood trauma has been an issue, and I've been able to come to terms with that during my recovery.
Yeah.
But whether it's present trauma or childhood trauma, the root of the behavior that you're describing is twofold, really. One, it's fear. It's fear. It's the fear that you're going to make an idiot of yourself, that you're not up to it, that you're somehow inadequate. I mean, a lot of addicts and alcoholics look successful and plausible. They appear on the surface to be doing well, but they're really, the way that they look and the way that they feel about themselves are completely at opposites. And, you know, one of the ways that active addiction has been described is you're trying to make your external reality match your internal view of yourself. So you have this view that somehow you're not worthy, you know, imposter syndrome, people sometimes call it, or, and it might be because you've been terribly diminished and shocked by things that should never have been done to you when you were a child, in my case. Or it might be because you have that kind of personality. You know, some people are just fearful. I don't think there's a rule about it, but the fact that you can get near-term improvement by drinking, or you get relief, I suppose is the word. The problem with that is it doesn't last. Everyone that ends up in recovery discovers that over time, whatever they put into their body, whether it's they smoke something or they, you know, put something in their arm or they drink something, it's not a sustainable solution. What it does is it dulls the pain. It's like an analgesic, you know, but the pain keeps coming back. And eventually not only does what they're taking not work, but in and of itself, it starts to have really deleterious effects. Like if you drink heavily to deal with the fact that you're uncomfortable, drinking heavily is really bad for you. You know, those of us who've been in recovery for any length of time, we all know men and women who've died because of active addiction, sometimes still unable to admit that they have a problem, sometimes propped up in bed, wasting away, smelling awful, all their organs collapsing, and they still, you know, and thank God I'm not one of them. And I hope you're not one of them either, because the good news is that there is a solution. And if you recognize that you have this affliction, which is perhaps to do with fear, it doesn't really matter, I don't think, whether it's to do with fear or not. In fact, one of the big snares and delusions about traditional forms of therapy is that they invite you to sit down and talk at great length about what happened. You know, what did they do to you? And oh dear, isn't that, at the end of the day, no amount of sympathy or digging up the past is going to deal with an active addiction. It just isn't. The way you need to deal with it is to get rid of the active addiction or get it under control, and then, if necessary, go back and deal with the trauma. And that's what happened to me. I mean, I was very fortunate in that I found people like Marn to help me, and I got a bit of sobriety, and then an opportunity came up to deal with the things that had happened to me when I was young, by serendipity, and that made an enormous difference. Now I'm able to talk about the past without sobbing. Who'd have thought it? And I'm able to, by and large, deal with life's ups and downs in a way that a healthy person does without thinking, but an addict or an alcoholic absolutely cannot do. You know, you say something horrible to me, or you look sideways, or you criticize my work, or you rebuff my advance, and, you know, I'm furious with you and I deserve a drink. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's got also a lot to do with, from my own experience, it's got a lot to do with not being able to sit with uncomfortable feelings. You know, so if I have an uncomfortable feeling, doesn't, like you said, doesn't matter where it came from. You know, I mean, and the first thing I think of is I just need to get rid of it. You know, how am I going to change this feeling? You know, it's just incredibly difficult to deal with as an addict. And say, for instance, if I have a cigarette, right? And after the cigarette, of course, it doesn't last very long, like you say, the feeling's back. But the problem is, to the addicts, you think that that drink or that cigarette, that's going to relieve my discomfort, right? Even for 5 minutes is better than nothing. What if someone tells you that? Even if it's for half an hour, I can feel better for half an hour, Simon. I need to feel better. What do you think to that?
Well, I think you're right. I think the problem is, though, it doesn't last, and it doesn't deal with whatever the underlying symptom is. So what we need, you know, being in recovery is finding a new way of living. It's not finding a new way of taking drugs or drinking. I mean, many of us come into recovery kind of hoping that we'll be able to carry on taking our favorite drug, but in a way that doesn't completely destroy us, like it used to be when we were young, you know. In reality, because of the kind of people that we are, whether it's genetic or what it is, we can't put anything in our body. And we have to learn other ways of dealing with that fear. I mean, everyone has fear. Let's be clear. Normal people have fear. There's a reason that human beings get fearful. It's to prepare us for difficult things, you know, fight or flight. The trouble is we have fear about absolutely everything. And one of the things that happens is the more that we drink and use, the more uncontrollable that fear becomes. Very often, by the time people are ready to come into recovery, they are nothing but fear. I mean, I was a shaking pile of sweaty, injured, walking with a stick, full of self-pity, sobbing fear, because I couldn't see any way forward, you know. I sort of laugh a little bit now. I don't say it to be dramatic, because it makes me laugh, because even the things that I've just said and the way that I felt, it's immensely narcissistic. It's immensely so, you know, here am I, poor me, you know, everything that happened to me happened because of choices that I made. Yeah, okay, I have an addiction, but I have a choice to do something about it. Yeah, and anyone that's listening to this and listening to Marn, you made a good choice. And if you carry on doing the things that are suggested on this site, you might end up joining me for dinner on your 4th anniversary. You know, like I will be doing tonight.
How do you deal with fear then?
I laugh at it now. I mean, one of the things about recovery is our basic natures don't change. It's just that we become aware of how these things operate on us. So I can see it, just like if somebody disrespects me because I say something and they look like they think I'm an idiot. I mean, 5 years ago, I thought, how dare you, you know, you know, and do not know who I am. And, you know, and now I think, oh, and that bit, the how dare you bit, you know, the Greta Thunberg bit, still comes up, you know, you're an idiot. And then I look at it and I think that's quite funny, because, you know, because what someone else says or thinks, I mean, first of all, it doesn't matter. It's just, you know, noise. And secondly, it's their business. I can't do anything to affect what you think or believe. You can think I'm an idiot. You know, you can hate my spectacles, think I need to shave my beard, you know, you can hate all Englishmen on principle. I'm sure there are people who do. There's nothing I can do about that. So there are very few things that I can do anything about. That's the reality of being a human being. We maybe get a few years. If we're lucky, we get a few healthy years. Our choice is to decide what to do with the years that we get. And we can spend them trying not to be upset about what everyone else is thinking, you know, or we can just put that to one side and try and focus on things that make us feel good. And you haven't asked about it, but I mean, the other thing about recovery is learning that the fact that you have grasped a few simple principles that have helped you put an addiction aside makes you so powerful when it comes to talking to other active alcoholics or addicts. You have an unique ability to communicate with them. Even if you're only 2 months sober, you can probably be of more use to an active alcoholic than some doctor that's got 20 years of experience. It's not because he's not a good man or a good woman and the qualifications aren't valuable. It's just that no one can be one of us unless they're one of us. And if you are one of us and you've managed to find a way of mastering that fear through a program, then you really have a great deal to give to other people. And that's, for me, that was one of the huge surprises of recovery, was discovering that quite early on, I could say stuff. Why is that? Well, because I've been in recovery long enough now to see other people who look exactly like the way I looked. In fact, I met one this week and get better. And a year or 2 years later, I don't recognize that person. They're reconciled with their wife, their kids are back in the house, they've got a steady job, their financial situation has settled down, and they're smiling. So I don't need to understand the chemistry of it or to write down a mathematical formula. I've observed it. It works, you know, and I know that if you do certain things, you have a chance. If you ignore them and just carry on the way you are before, which is I can control everything and I'm really smart, then good luck. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, as in active addiction, we tend to lie to ourselves a lot, right? I mean, in order to destroy yourself, you need to be able to say some serious lies to yourself, that, oh, I need this, oh, it's my childhood, oh, it's my dad, oh, it's my mom, and the problem is when you go for therapy, well-meaning people, is that you lie to them too.
Yeah. And they encourage you to tell them all about this terrible suffering that you have. It's like that celebrity interview 2 weeks ago that I won't mention because I don't. It's oh, yeah, we were living. I lived in a because I did okay. I had a good education. I had a good job. I earned lots of money. I'm living in a palace, but nobody loves me. And you've no idea the suffering that I've been through with my 20 million quid. I mean, it's nothing to do with our external circumstances. It's to do with the way that we look at the world. And those of it, because the fact of the matter is, rich people can choose to be miserable, and poor people can choose to be happy. In fact, I often think that poor people have a better chance, to be perfectly honest, because they don't have any illusions about the nature of the world, And here in Asia, and I'm in Southeast Asia right now, I know lots and lots and lots of people who have very little, who are walking through life with a big smile on their faces. We live in a world that's full of very privileged people who think they're victims. Don't be a victim. Alcoholics we're victims. We drink to celebrate a victory. We drink to celebrate a failure. We just drink because we deserve a drink. Because if you had my life, you'd drink too. Well, that's just all self-indulgent nonsense. The reality is everyone has to deal with stuff, and most people find a way of dealing with it without drinking until they black out or wake up in a police cell, which most of us have done.
I tell you what's interesting, Simon, is that you're one of the things I really respect about you, and one of the only people I know who is choosing to be happy. And that's very, very rare. I think that most people, a lot of it's much easier to choose to be whiny. A little bit like, oh, and then you find a few reasons why. Like, let me tell you, I just spoke to a friend yesterday, and there's always a sob story, and there's always a sob story, right? I mean, everybody has sob stories, and I thought, I mean, sometimes you have to think very hard to find a sob story, especially if you are like a royalty, right? For instance, but this friend of mine, his wife died of cancer, and I was like, oh wow, I mean, that's terrible. You get the sympathy, and then how many years ago was that? 17 years ago. He's the saddest person I've ever met, and he said, well, man, you put a smile on my face. And I said to him, you should be putting a smile on people's faces. There's a lot of like, I feel like it's the challenge almost today is to be happy. Choose to be happy.
Well, you can choose to regard your life as a tragedy, or you can choose to regard it as a comedy. And I regard it as a comedy. The old-fashioned kind of comedy where you're laughing at somebody falling over their shoelace, or falling off a ladder and ending up with their head in a bucket of water. Because that's what my life has been like. I've had lots of opportunities, and I've fucked up every single one. Sometimes in the most ludicrous way. I mean, there I am lying in a pile of vomit when someone's just given me a huge pay rise or whatever the hell. What do I do? Oh, poor me. No, it's funny. I'm an idiot. It's funny. Of course it's funny. And, there are 7.5 billion human beings on this planet. There'll soon be 8 billion. You're really not that important. If your head's telling you, oh, it's so hard and I'm so important and nobody understands me, get a grip. Really, you're not. And I'm not. What I am is pretty funny. And start by understanding that what we do is immensely funny in the scheme of things. It's not. You can go back and read, like my daughter did, literature from 1,500 or 2,000 years before our Lord was born, and you'll read drunken people feeling sorry for themselves. It's some of the earliest poetry that we have. Oh, I don't know what to do. There's one by a famous princess, I forget her name. She's sitting in her palace, her father's the king, and she can't decide what to do. Is she going to go for a ride on her new chariot, which is the equivalent to kind of a sports car and massively expensive, or is she going to go down the club and get pissed with her mates, and then she'll end up going to bed with one of them and she won't feel very well? This kind of thing has been going on forever. It's in the nature of the human condition. You can choose to be miserable, or you can choose not to be miserable. And do you know what? It's much nicer. And the funny thing about not being miserable is other people quite like you then, you know?
Right.
I mean, being around somebody that's constantly, it'd be like, I don't know. We shouldn't pick on real personalities, should we? But there are some people who are constantly nagging you and telling you how miserable things are. And, you know, really? You know, the things that are going wrong in the world that we can actually do anything about. I mean, the Venn diagram, things that are going on wrong in the world, things that I could do something about. You know, the bit in the middle where those two things come together, it's so bloody small. You know, the best way to deal with the catastrophes threatening the planet is to do the washing up. You know, that's about the best that you could do. Or, you know, or phone up a mate who's having a hard time, you know, or just do what you can do in the situation you find yourself in. Grandiosity and, oh, it's all terrible, and, you know, my palace, people don't understand me, and, you know, my wife doesn't understand me, and my mother was horrible to me, and that bloke in the news agents this morning looked at me as if he didn't think I was as important as I am, and, oh dear God. And I don't have time for that, you know. And I know people that are exactly like that, and I like being around people who laugh and who like, and many of them have been through recovery. And one of the things that we do is we tell the stories of the ridiculous things that we've done when in active addiction, including things that really to other people would not seem very funny, like being arrested and going to jail, you know, or breaking a limb, or having a car crash and hurting other people, you know. But we laugh because that's part of another life. We did it. We're honest about it, and we come to terms with it, you know. So yeah, it's a choice. Gratitude is a choice. And I start every day by just thanking our Lord for letting me be alive, because there's so many good things to look forward to. There's the first cup of coffee. That's a great thing to look forward to. There's, you know, there's talking to friends, going to the office, a bacon sandwich, whatever it happens to be. I'm not supposed to eat those anymore, am I? No. But a plate of healthy oatmeal. It's, you know, look, having had a narrow squeak from cancer in December, it's very hard for me to take anything very seriously. And, you know, when I got back to the office, and I say this with the greatest of love to my business partner, I'd been out of the office for 2 months. I'd had a very serious surgery. I went back there, and within 5 minutes, he was talking about how frustrated he was because some people in the office were writing emails, you know, with the wrong punctuation and you know, and capital letters in the wrong. I was thinking, do I really care? Do I really care about people writing emails in bad English? I mean, I kind of do, but frankly, not a whole hell of a lot. You know, in terms of what matters in the universe, it's not in my top 100 things. You know, what's in my top 100 things? Getting out of bed, being grateful, finding ways to be of service to other people, and doing the next thing that I'm supposed to be doing. You know, and generally we know what that is. You know, whether it's a business thing or a friendly thing or whatever. I get just enormous pleasure out of life. I always have done, but it sort of diminished as I got more and more into active addiction, to the point where everything made me weep. And that's the other funny thing about being in active addiction, is I thought I was a sensitive soul when in fact I was very narcissistic and sentimental. You know, I'd hear a song or see a pretty puppy and just kind of collapse in a weeping heap because it was all so much, too much. Now mostly I giggle. Now mostly I giggle. And I recommend it.
Yeah,
Laugh.
I think you're touching on the real reason. I think the reason is because when we are in active addiction, we are extremely egotistical. You know, everything is about us. You know, egotistical isn't like, oh, I think I'm great. It can be, oh, I think I'm shit, right? And oh, my life is shit. You know, and that egotistical part of us consumes us. It's like, oh, my problem is the biggest. You know, like out of the entire universe, you know, my problem, how I think, my opinions, and so on is so important, which is kind of crazy, right? And when we come into recovery, we start to think of others. You know, we start to look at how we can make other people smile or how we can help others. It's a totally different view from when we're in active addiction. And that's why in every recovery program, including at Let's Recover, the final step is always to help others. think about others, to how to get out of your own very small, very dark, egotistical mind, right? I mean, anyway, you touched on a lot of good things. I wish we could like really chat nonstop about stuff. I mean, one of the things that I had a chat with Michael like this, and we touched about the use of therapy, you know, and how it wasn't. I mean, it was very well meaning, and I did get something out of it, but it also gave me many years of whining and sitting in my own.
I quite agree. I quite agree.
It was, and at the end of it, I realized nothing has changed. I was, you know, mom's still the problem. Come on, you know, I mean.
Yes, yeah, I quite agree. Once you get a measure of sobriety in your life, a lot of things resolve themselves. I could never have believed. I thought I was going to die or go mad or one or the other because I was at my wit's end. You know, I mean, as you know, I went bankrupt. You know, my girlfriend very sensibly traveled to the other side of the world and married somebody else, good, sensible girl. And you know, I lost my car, I lost my flat, and I totally lost my health and self-respect. You know, which is quite funny, really, because none of that really matters. In fact, it's done me a lot of good. It's done me a lot of good. Now I have a bicycle and a rental apartment and lots of good friends like Marn, and life's good.
And you've changed a lot, you know, you've changed a lot. And I think that choice of the choosing of being happy, you know, is something that, I mean, remember when we used to whine together for
Wine, us.
yeah, with our education and our, you know, first world problems, you know, like really, really. So I'm very grateful that you came on to have a chat today. And it's just even like your energy, you know, you're like a Santa Claus.
Well, it's not, the energy doesn't come from me. It comes from somebody up there. So, you know, I'm very grateful to be here, Marn. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Simon. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.